Tukerangi e Tukerangi, Tukerangi. They follow Luke e Tukerangi, Tukerangi. They were like, it's a compliment, Tukerangi. Here goes my mother here to Tukerangi. I thought maybe I think the proper holiday is king and poor. No, there. And man. Tukerangi. I now I keep a also Ponsonby. No, there.
That's why I now you I own it. If I know my mother, going to my TV, you know, Carlo, in a gallery, but tomorrow to gather like 1990. That's a good one. I am not my master in its new go down to the whole and move pay one. I had to
Welcome to me. I'd like to say thank you to all of you being here and especially to our two example guest speakers. Very well. I'd like to also acknowledge people who are tuning in on the Zoom and I don't know who you are, but I think it's good. This is an important reason to so many respect because Bishop doing the life was well up another speaker, you know, all known I think the ecclesiastical community, but also the orphan community, because there's various scenes and occasionally associated around social justice. And this speaking of the series of more religious, which are held in its name, and there are 2 lectures every year. First, is tonight, the Red Spire Vote. Second is next week, that Fire Vote. So, Bishop John Blood, and we will speak in response to what they've said. And the idea is simply it's to actually give people decent information and knowledge about things that are important. It seems that such information involves a lot of tainted with all sorts of different things. So, my job is I'm Simon Baker, here with Scott. I actually need a comment about this name on YouTube.
It's very good. Thank you, John. Yes, you're very well. Reverend Prince and I and the Saints congregation would like to welcome you here. This was a pretty special place for Jim. It's great that we can commemorate him and remember him with this series. He was a strong advocate of social justice and open communication and reconciliation and respecting others. I was going to make some comments about standards of behaviour because we were a little nervous about who might come along tonight, but scanning the crowd, I think we're probably in safe and capable hands. But this is going to be an interesting presentation. There will be opportunities to have questions at the end of the presentation, and it's about information sharing. So I don't think I need to cover respectful behaviour. We are in a sacred space and it was a special place for Jim. I see we have Simon from the media here, which is good. And if there are any other media people, happy to acknowledge you. We'd like to acknowledge Bishop John Bluck and Bishop Ross Bay, who are here. And it's great to see you, Jane, Jim's wife, and Beverly White, Jim's mum, sends her apologies. Just a little bit of housekeeping, health and safety. I've always got to remember that. Fire exits, should there be a fire, there's fire exits, 2 here and 1 behind me. Should there be an earthquake, please use those because going out the doors you came in, the pipe organs could collapse on you. That's been identified as a hazard. So try and use those ones. Toilets are out the back in the hall. And of course, there will be a supper after the presentation. I'd like to introduce the 2 speakers, Hannah Andrews and Margie Tukerangi. They are both co-chairs at Newton Central School. Margie has 3 children there in the full immersion, and she works in a wider iwi space with leadership roles in governance and operations. And Hannah, as the other co-chair, has 2 children at the school. She's been involved in both legal and commercial and in the tech space, and is focusing on the governance sector as well. So I'd like to now ask Bishop Ross to open with prayer, and then we can get underway. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Simon. Thank you especially for the health and safety warning. It's not the only church in the diocese where the organ can be a hazard, I have to say. It's good to be together again. I too want to acknowledge Jane's presence. Good to have Bishop John here to have some idea what he should do next week. But to those of you who come from each of the respective parishes who generously host us, and to those who are from other places, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kai noi tātou. E te atua tō mātou kaihanga. Ka te aho te maramatanga me te ora I o kupu kōrero. Ka tīmātou mahi ka mo te tika me te aroha. Ia tia kia u tonu ki a mātou tu aroha I roto I tēnei hui nā. Whaka ki a mātou, whakaro a mātou mahi katoa e tō wairua tapu. Amine. God our Creator, when you speak there is light and life. When you act there is justice and love. Grant that your love may be present in our meeting, so that what we say and what we do may be filled with your Holy Spirit. Amen.
So Hannah and Margie, over to you. Feel free.
I think Margie's going to take that. Yeah, no, she wants it. Too much.
I don't want to stand too close to Hannah in case she hits me.
Be more a kick.
I didn't read the note.
Okay, let's check this works. Cool. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ki te taha o tōku mama no Ingarani o Kutipuna. I tai mai o Kutipuna ki te waipata pounamu I te tau kotahi manu, warurau me rima takau. E tipu aki hau ki Otautahi ki Waiharakeke hoki, ko Hannah Andrews tōku ingoa. Ko tēnei taku mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o te rohi nei, ka mihi hoki au ki ngā tohu o te rohi nei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora koutou, it's so nice to have you here to listen to Margie and I talk about a topic about which we are very passionate. Along with Margie, I'm co-chair of Newton Central School. I grew up in Blenheim and Christchurch and was part of a bilingual school when I was in Blenheim, but since then moved into a more Pākehā-centric world through high school and then through 15 years where I worked as a commercial lawyer in Auckland and in London. I joined Newton Central in 2018 when my son just went along to the local school for which we were in zone. Within a couple of months, I'd been shoulder tapped for the board due to an unfortunate misunderstanding about my career. I turned up at my first board hui, was presented with financial statements and had to inform them that no, I wasn't actually a tax lawyer, I was a tech lawyer. Not quite so useful to them, though my boss is here and he'll think that tech lawyers are very, very useful. So I joined the board and I didn't even know at the time that Newton Central was a co-governance school. And even if I had known, I probably wouldn't have known what that meant. It was very clear quickly, though, that this was a board that did things differently. There were a lot of voices around the table and those voices were all listened to. It took me an embarrassingly long period of time to understand who the te whao ropu that kept being talked about were, te whao being our Māori medium equivalent of a school board. But once I had understood and seen this co-governance in action, I'd like to think that I'm probably now one of its biggest fans. I'm here tonight to try and convey to you in the next half hour just how much co-governance has enriched my life. It's changed the way I think, it's changed my perspective, and it's changed the speed with which I react to things. This talk tonight is a bit outside our comfort zone. Neither of us are lecturers. And in an election year, the topic of co-governance has become a particularly fraught one. But because we are so passionate about this message and so excited about what co-governance has brought to our school and to our community, it was too important an opportunity for us to pass up. So we really hope that we impart some of our enthusiasm and allay any fears or apprehension you might have about co-governance through our lived experience of it at Newton Central School.
Kia ora rā, Hannah. Mai maunga nui ki tāmaki. Mahuhu ki te rangi te waka, no Ngāti Whātua, e mihi ana kia koutou. Tiro atu ki Moihau, ki uta ki te aroha, te waka tainui, te parihauraki, ko te rā te taha o tōku māma, no parihauraki tuku tēnei e tuana ki a koutou. Ko Wiremu he mana rau ko Christine Tukerangi o Kumātua, ko Margie Tukerangi ahau. I hail from Ngāti Whātua. I also hail from the Hauraki Plains. My name is Margie, and as Sana said, I am a co-chair on this board. I feel a bit fraught because there's been so many more people who have stood before us, who have really laid the baseline of what we get to celebrate this year as we approach our centennial and formalising our co-governance in education. A bit about me. My background, as mentioned, I sit in iwi politics today, but I grew up, if my dad was still alive now, he'd be 88. And I grew up with his mother for a lot of my life till I was around 21. If she was around now, she'd be around about near 120. So it gives you a bit of an idea of I suppose, the richness that I was enriched in growing up, but my language was never mine. It was the first language for my father, it was the first language for my grandmother, who was also Irish, but it's not something that we inherited. We come from an area which adopted the faith of the Ratana Church to help them through those turbulent times of the Tohungism Act and everything that they went through. I bring that to light really to shed some light and understanding on the trauma that sits within and how personal this is for me around some of the tiriti grievances over the years. And I don't know how, but somehow or other, it led me overseas for 8 years abroad, exploring other cultures across Europe, South America, through Asia, and then just finding a real affinity and appreciation for natives across the world, the globe, and brought me back home to dedicate my adulthood to standing on both worlds, to see how the two spaces coexist better, essentially. And so my journey began back to my marae. I came back and started to get involved in my marae, and then overnight I felt like I got thrown into negotiations and ended up in co-governance spaces for the Kaiparamoana negotiations and so forth. So I have a bit of background in this new term, co-governance, but I'm here today because I'm really proud of how co-governance works at Newton Central. And I want to share why it works, what makes it so good. Fundamentally, we had this conversation earlier. For me, it's around whanaungatanga, and it's around how we engage with one another. And from my perspective, share my culture and my heritage with the rest of our world. Other than that, I have jumped into Newton, I think 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm relatively new, but I think we've got a lot to share here. I'm probably looking more forward to the Q&A, because what we've tried to encapsulate here is all quite technical. And with co-governance, how do you define it? From my worldview, it's not something we can write. It's something you'll see. And you probably didn't notice it, but Hannah gave me a look when I stood up and I did the waiata. That look was, Margie, you said we weren't going to sing it in this tune, but you're singing it in this tune anyway. You said that we're going to sing it in the easy tune so that I can sing with you. Now, I understood all of that while she stood there and looked at me and carried on anyway. And she just went with it. This is the beauty that I hope we can actually convey across today.
Glad you acknowledged that. So we'll start at the beginning. Why is co-governance important? Is a fairly substantive question. So at Newton Central, we base our co-governance model on te tiriti o Waitangi. And I call it te tiriti with intention. As I'm sure we are all aware, there are two versions of the Treaty of Waitangi that was signed in 1840. There was the English language version and te tiriti, the Māori language version. At Newton, we uphold te tiriti o Waitangi, the Māori version, as being the version that we should be following. One of the key reasons for this is of the 500 plus chiefs who signed the treaty back in 1840, all but 39 signed it in Te Reo Māori. So that is the version that we have chosen to use as we base our co-governance. So when we look to our co-governance model, there are two articles that guide our way. The first article, Article 1, the Māori chiefs agreed to give up kawanatanga over their land to the Crown. Now, kawanatanga was not a Māori word at the time. It is essentially a transliteration of the word governorship or governance. Under Article 2, the chiefs retained tino rangatiratanga over their whenua, kāinga and taonga, the land, their treasures, the villages. Tino rangatiratanga is and was a Māori word, and it means utmost or highest chieftainship. So you've got the two articles, Article 1, agreeing to give up governorship, and Article 2, retaining highest or utmost chieftainship. So how we look at this in Newton Central is we look at this as essentially, and what speaks to me is how the Waitangi Tribunal has actually defined this. And you know, obviously this has been the subject of much debate over the last 150 years, and there are people far more learned than me that can spend a lot more time talking about this. But to look at how we are approaching it in Newton Central and to give a basis for the rest of our discussion this evening, how the Waitangi Tribunal looks at these two different articles is they are equal roles with different spheres of influence. So Article 1, the kawanatanga or governorship, is essentially governs the role between the school and the state. It is, you know, back in 1840, it was the governance of the unruly British settlers that was being given over to the Crown. The second article is the tino rangatiratanga, which is the ability for Māori to co-govern over the school with us together in partnership. And for me, this is the true essence of co-governorship, the equal roles, different spheres of influence. We come to the table with two worldviews. We work together with the same goals in mind, but we have these different perspectives moving towards the common goal. And for me, this is what makes our governance decisions in Newton Central so powerful. By the time we get to a decision, which is made via consensus, we've explored it from so many different angles. We've heard from different worldviews, we've heard from different perspectives, and we've taken those all on board to come to the conclusions that we've reached. This can only enhance and strengthen our decision-making, especially as we communicate that decision-making to our community. On a personal level, I can't help but get excited about everything I've learned about Te Ao Māori and Tikanga Māori as part of this journey. The partnership in the two spheres of influence, what makes this strong is we bring each other on the journey. It's not governing our spheres in isolation. So if there is an issue that involves Te Ao Māori, it will be led by Margie, but she will take everybody on that journey with her to understand, to impart that knowledge, to share tikanga, to share her culture. And from that, you know, our own knowledge and our own understanding grows, which helps support our community in the decisions that we reach. Do you have anything you want to add to that? No.
That's my cue. Our timeline. Oh, right. Okay, well, let's flip over and have a look at that timeline. This Newton Central this year celebrates its centennial. So fast forward 65 years, you come to 1988, and then we have Principal Tim Heath, who then allows Māori lessons to be introduced to the kura. There's a bit of progress there around Māori language being used in the school. Then in 1991, they appoint the first Māori parent onto the Newton board. This continues to progress further. In 1993, we then do our first bilingual units. In 1994, it's named Whakarongorua. This is where Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei come in. They give this name. Then we go to a Rumaki unit, which is a full immersion unit. In 1997, it just starts to increase so that by the time we hit around 2000, we've then got 2 units running. The tipping point for the school, though, was although we had language pathways recognised in the school around 93, 94, 97, there was an incident in 1999. There's an annual production that happens at the kura. And at the time, the bilingual units and the Māori units wanted to do a pōhiri to welcome all the manuhiri onto the school. At the time, there was also a Māori principal, but the parents didn't support it. Because of this, in 2000, this is what tripped a bit of a push within the school and the parents, particularly in the Māori unit, to recognise that they needed to be in a position to help people understand our culture and why these things are important. And as Hannah said, bring them on the journey. And then it continues from there. So we then celebrate our co-governance model, which grows right up until this next slide that's coming up. This year we formalise it. What I want to highlight in there, which was really telling for me, is I want to acknowledge Kawaho Hoskins, who was very pivotal in this journey for our school in particular. when I spoke to her last year, I think it was, about us formalising our co-governance this year, it was quite pleasing for me to understand that we hit the brief. Her intention back then, when they did this, wasn't to hold space for Māori or to protect our tikanga as such. It was whanaungatanga. And how do we engage in a meaningful way to have everyone understand the values and the richness that we feel to be valued and rich, but also to share it and bring everyone on the journey, as Hannah's already mentioned. I feel that we do that now. Hannah's going to ground me because I'm probably going to go into the next slide unconsciously. So I'll stop looking at her and look this way. I just want to acknowledge that there's quite a bit of history there. I was asked the other day, what tripped the co-governance? I want to say that whilst we see this on here and we see Newton as being 100 years this year, you know, let's not forget there was the tiriti. And then even before then, there was the other flag and our confederation that we did. Let's not forget that, you know, in 1913, one of the studies done by Professor Bruce Briggs for the Kohanga claim identified that 90% Māori was spoken at schools in 1913. By the time it hit 1950, that had declined down to 55%. And by the time it hit 1975, it had declined again down to 5%. And this is what triggered a lot of the movements in the early 70s. So I'm just giving a broader context that whilst we're here celebrating Newton, it's been a long journey. But again, it brings me back to what's so good about us is despite all of that, we embrace this with an open mind and an open heart and find ways to work together. What you're seeing here is really what happens at the board table and right through our kura. But I'll hand it over to Hannah because she's smiling at me politely.
I've already clicked accidentally early. So as Margie mentions, we've got a long history of co-governance and in particular 25 years of semi-formal, formal co-governance at Newton Central School. But we've realised that actually we did have to formalise this. This was a trust-based model for our whānau. So we have our auraki, our school board, sorry, that goes across the school. And we also have Te Whao Urutaki, which is a Māori medium. It started as a Māori education committee. It's essentially a board that governs our Māori medium sector of the school. We have a third of our children in either full immersion te reo Māori or bilingual education, and 2/3 in our auraki or in English medium pathway. So we've been operating quite nicely along on this informalised co-governance model. Under the legislation, we have 5 elected board members that come through our auraki pathway. That's just done through the usual process of school elections. And we co-opt Te Whao Urutaki members onto our board. Now, the legislation only allows us to co-opt 1 less than the elected numbers onto the board. So we've had 5 auraki representatives, 4 Te Whao Urutaki representatives on our board for a number of years. That to us is not pure co-governance. Co-governance is equal representation. It's 50-50. And to achieve that, we had to go down a process of adopting an alternative constitution. So publishing a gazette notice through the minister to move to a 50-50 representation model. Off the back of 25 years of everyone else's hard work, Margie and I were really thrilled to have this signed off by the minister 3 weeks ago, just before Parliament rose for the end of the session. So, it's been a crowning moment for the school, but I think we're really conscious of the fact that we've been the ones to usher it across the finishing post, but it's off the back of the work of others. So, our board now, it looks like this. This is our co-governance board that will come into effect at the start of next year. We have 4 Te Aka Pūkaya reps. Te Aka Pūkaya is our Māori medium unit. Now, our whānau in Te Aka Pūkaya can bring those reps to our board in whatever way they choose to do so. So that is a self-governing way that they can determine who is to represent Māori whānau in Te Aka Pūkaya on the board. We then have our auraki reps coming through the traditional election pathway. We have our tumuaki, our principal, who's with us tonight, and we have a staff rep, which is also done through the traditional processes. Now, Before I come to the Ngāti Whātua rep, which I'm going to pass to Margie, I think one other really important point that underpins our board is our consensus model. So the numbers don't actually matter in the end because we're never going to run a majority vote. We've navigated some really difficult decisions based on majorities. We've navigated our school implemented mandatory mask wearing when the government had relaxed the requirements in schools. And this was not a initially unanimous decision by the board. This required compromise, consultation, and a lot of discussion. More recently, we appointed a new principal to start this year, and getting 10 people to agree on, candidates and how to move forward the process was a big discussion as well. But consensus is what underpins our model, and it means that we are all listening. And when we go to our community with a decision, that decision is strong. There's no washing your hands of it and saying, well, I didn't vote for it, but the majority wanted to. We all stand behind it. And just as a little aside, this is one way that legislation does not support us. So while we are able to legislate to have 50-50 representation, one thing that the Education Act still does not do is allow, for example, a co-principal, a co-chair model that's not recognised by the Act. The consensus decision-making is also not recognised by the Act. So we're celebrating this, but we're still pushing and agitating so that these models can actually be better recognised in law. Now, the last position up there is our Ngāti Whātua representative, which is a new position on our board and one we're really excited about. So, Margs, do you want to explain how that came about?
Yeah, sure. I'll just talk a little bit more on this. This process itself took about 3 years to figure out the membership during COVID, I must say. And thankfully, our board allowed Te Whao to lead it. And that's a big trust in itself. So we took it, and I think just even in that act there, we came in open because of this. There was already give. We went through it quite detailed to determine whether we needed to have 2 separate staff members representing the two medium pathways or language pathways. It was decided that it wasn't required. The equal component there of the 4 from our mainstream part of the school and 4 from our Māori medium, I must say, I've been on co-governance boards in other areas, but that in itself is sheer magic. It has us come into the discussion very differently, and it allows us to open up, I think. It actually demonstrates true partnership, equity, and it allows us to engage both ways in real whanaungatanga, and I think that is probably key, and that's where I give credits to Newton Central in particular. This model here, this is based on love and give. Underpinning it with that is what makes it so successful. What we've gone and done is gone and been even cleverer and gone and brought Ngāti Whātua into it, acknowledging them as mana whenua for this rohe. We've always had a relationship with them. However, solidifying it this way and acknowledging them has opened the door for our school in so many ways, and it actually benefits our kids in ways that we probably didn't anticipate. But intentionally providing a space for them to contribute has, in fact, in the last 2 months, I'd say, Brian, we've seen the fruits of all of that. We now have them at our disposal to provide us with plants every year when new kids come in. We've always planted trees. Now we get to eco-source. They've given us their haka pōhiri to do pōhiri on the school. There's just a lot of things. They've committed themselves to coming into our curriculum once a year to ensure that all of our plans, policies, and curriculum reflect local knowledge. Now, the trigger on this was in the policy, the new changes in the Education Act in 2020 or 1920 gave rise to schools to demonstrate their commitment to the tiriti, to te tiriti. And that's what triggered it. However, the subset of it was probably just reinforcing something we've already done for a few years and naturally just sees the school thrive because of it. They're now involved in naming our school, the Māori name. We feel a bit spoiled because they're quite well sought after.
Mm.
They're at our disposal, really. We offered to them to see how they wanted to engage with the school and participate. This was only one option. They took this option and now they're part of our school makeup. So I suppose what I'm getting at there is we're probably rich for the balance of having equal partnership, but we've just gone and taken another layer and then brought in the mana whenua. From my understanding, we're one of the first schools, if not the first. I want to say the first, but because we've got media in the room, I will say one of the first. This hasn't been confirmed from Wellington yet, but they're feeling confident that we are the first to model something like this. It's something very much to be proud of, but when I consider what my role is as a board member on my child's school, it's about providing my child the best head start. This gives it from all angles. Everything that we provide at the board table, as Hannah said, it's well-rounded. Any governing table, you'd have heads there that have governance experience, which is all fantastic, and diversity you want to promote. But coming at it from two worldviews is like a waka haurua, and it allows us to journey together. So it is proud of it. She's looking at me like that again, so I'm going to take that as my cue to hand it on.
Well, no, it's actually you next, and I think you might have touched a little bit on that.
Oh, have I?
What makes I think I just wanted to add on to what Margie is saying is I think the real difference we've come in the last 2 years is to create this intentionality of relationships. So the relationship with Ngāti Whātua was always there. Our relationship with having our Te Whao members on the board was always there. But by really cementing it in an alternative constitution that binds us together, it's made our relationship incredibly intentional. And so you almost invest more in it because we all feel honoured to be part of it. We all feel that we are part of something special. And so it does mean that we are, at the table with even more enthusiasm than we might have had in the past.
To add to that, it doesn't stop the diversity that comes through the board anyway. We've got Polynesian, we've got loads of different diversity at our board table, and everyone is enriched for this model. Yeah, because of this model. Sorry, carry on.
Do you want to do anything else about this?
Meaningful engagement. Look, I said it earlier on. It is about whanaungatanga, and it is about sharing that space. It's about diversity, but I think more than anything, as I've said before, everyone comes into the room feeling equal, no agendas, open hearts, open minds. It allows us to have focused discussions on the kaupapa and come out with wholesome decisions, really.
And I think that's the other point to make is that no matter how we have come to that board table, when we're there as one, and making decisions for the benefit of our children and our kura. There's no, as Margie said, there's no agendas that because you've come to the board through a specific pathway, you're going to push that pathway.
That's a good point. So there are some other schools, co-governance models that I know of that do have Māori representation on the board, but it's not equal like this. And I do know of those boards and how they work. To be fair, the resistance is always there from the outset because they feel they've got the lower hand and some of them. So without that equity there, it also depicts and determines the way in which individuals engage and how we share space. This really helps that, I find. But I'm waiting for you to flip the slides in case that's for me.
So the next one's me. So after waxing lyrical for the last 15-20 minutes on our co-governance model, I think we'd be remiss to acknowledge that this does go wrong, and in fact has gone very wrong at Newton Central over the last 25 years. I was sitting on the board in 2020, I think it was, when an email was inadvertently sent. I was co-chair at the time with our old principal. And the email was inadvertently sent to our Te Whao Ropu that purported to suggest that we would take away the co-governance model, that it would simply collapse. Of course, this created immediate distress and hurt. It was sent out of a misguided delegation, and I don't think that was the intention. But essentially what it signalled to Aote Whaoropu was that we still felt that they were only at the table because of our grace, and that they didn't have a right to be there, and that that could be taken away at any time. When you're talking about a model that's based on trust and faith, that immediately chips away at its very foundations. And we were at crisis mode. This very, very nearly collapsed the entire co-governance structure at Newton Central. So what did we do? Initially, it was relying on that whanaungatanga. So the principal and I went and met with Te Whao and listened. We simply sat and listened. And it is to the immense credit and my amazement at Te Whao that from that conversation, they let out their hurt and were able and willing to rebuild. They were still happy to sit around a table with us and discuss how we can make this work. But of course, we had to put practical steps in place as well. So the first thing we did was we put in a code of conduct, which we hadn't had a code of conduct be reviewed for a long time. So the initial thing we had to do was create a safe space for everyone to come back to the table and start to rebuild together. So the code of conduct was passed very, very quickly. And the next step was it really solidified our passion to get this alternative constitution passed, because then it's not on the say of anyone. This doesn't take one bad player to take this model that means so much to people at Newton away. So this was when Margie actually joined the board as well, and it became a passion project of ours in particular to work with the Ministry of Education to get this across the line. But I think, we're always still going to be learning. We're always still going to be pushing forward. And we don't see this now that we've achieved this alternative constitution as being the full stop. Relationships are relationships and they continue to evolve. And as we move out of the co-chair roles and new people come in, they will still have to find their footing. But we feel what we've done is established a really strong framework, a model of trust and listening and whanaungatanga that can be carried forward no matter who those chairs or who those people sitting around the table are. So yeah, I mean, I think we've navigated really bad times, but I think we have come through stronger. It is a cliche, but we have come through stronger, and what we've achieved in the last 3 years building on that hurt, it's obviously terrible that things like that happen, but in acknowledging them and addressing them, we hope to not repeat our mistakes.
Extending off that, there is no disputing that there's hurt and trauma that sits amongst our Māori whānau, especially at our kura, or any Māori for that matter. However, we saw this as an opportunity again to step into a space and how, again, whakawhanaunga. How do we coexist? How do we best support the outcomes for all of our children? So we took up that challenge. It was a turbulent time. It was probably triggered by something quite personal and very much driven within us. But the trust demonstrated by the board, to be quite fair, the trust demonstrated by the board at the time when our representatives were about to come off, actually allowed us to engage in that space quite freely as well, and not as, I guess, defensive. So it always links back to what Te Kawaho said, that this was always about whanaungatanga. It wasn't necessarily about holding space, and it allowed us to come in the way that we came in and have continued to be since. It's trust has been immense, whānau, and I can't really express the different ways that sits there. I will just deviate here. This is a personal experience, but I think it's quite significant, and I wanted Hannah to tell it, but she hasn't told it yet, so I'm going to throw her in it. Our deputy principal lost her mother at the start of this year, and it didn't occur to me, being a co-chair for our arm, of course, I would be there, we would lead it, our whānau would make sure that we go there to pay our respects for our deputy principal. It didn't occur to me that Hannah wouldn't have thought she wasn't invited. I naturally texted her and asked if she'd come to represent the school or just come. She was very shocked. She probably shouldn't have had any tasks, but because I wasn't listening, and I didn't come prepared. I made her bring the envelope. She showed up, but I'd like you to share what that was for you, because it surprised me to hear from her that in her adult life, she hadn't been to a Māori tangi.
I think for me, what it showed was the richness that can come from being involved and invited into another culture and another space. And particularly, I guess, from a Pākehā viewpoint, at a time of death, which often we want our nearest and dearest and closest with us, and being invited into this space where it's a celebration of life, it's a celebration of spirit. I came out of it. I think I texted Margie saying, my wairoa felt complete. And I came home and talked to my husband about it and felt that, this is really why we're in the co-governance model. There is so much we can learn from each other. And there's not negatives that come from that. It is only enhancements and an understanding that means that when we move together forward within Aotearoa, we're moving in a path that is, woven and full of the complexities that come with living in a multicultural society. But the understanding and being involved is just something that you can't get from a book. You can't sort of read. You've got to put yourself out there, be invited, and go along.
I think that's been one of the challenges for me doing this presentation, because articulating what I feel and what I'm trying to convey is not something that I can put in a PowerPoint or even possibly in a lecture, but will show. To the point that even Hannah was asking me what she wears. It shocked me, but I didn't realize that was a thing. And inviting Hannah into it to share it, she's asking me all these questions, getting more familiar with our culture. And you'll probably find that our values within Māoridom actually assimilate the values that the school upholds, because it's taiao focused. That is our world. Our world is built on our connection to the whenua. When we introduce ourselves, we'll introduce ourselves by the maunga, by the moana, and everything that's whenua centric. And we start there first and foremost always. So there are a lot of parallels in the way in which the school naturally runs to our world that just makes sense. Allow them to be intrinsic.
So that's us. Do you want
to read this?
Yeah.
Okay, this was the one task that Hannah gave me. So I'm gonna cheat. We've got a written piece here. So this is something that her and I have prepared for our centennial off the back of all these great tributes. So I just want to wrap it up by this. Further, we understand that co-governance often stems from a place of trauma. There has been anger and there has been hurt. First and foremost, we acknowledge that. In any world, aroha, love, is the warmest cloak for this trauma. In my world, in Hannah's world, looking at our co-governance model in light of Te Tiriti, we don't see ourselves as simply settling for this model because it's better than what we had before, or because it's better than nothing. Noting that clause, Article 2, is actually about full autonomy. That's not what we're pushing for here. We're talking about coexisting. We also don't see our model as being the answer to all past wrongs. It's the stepping stones to doing the right thing in alignment with Te Tiriti o Waitangi, equal partnership, and our definition of what co-governance means to Newton Central School hasn't finished. We haven't put a full stop on the processes or policies that underpin it, recognising that there have been a lot of trials and tribulations to get us to this point, and there will be more to come. What we are doing is amazing and rewarding, but it can also always improve in an ever-evolving, ever-progressing co-governance model. We can and will keep on pushing and prodding and looking to enhance mana motuhake within our concept of partnership. What an exciting time for us at the kura, what an exciting time for the kura, and what an exciting time for Aotearoa. We can't go back now. All we can do is move forward and continue working towards what was envisioned by Te Tiriti o Waitangi in the wisdoms of tā he mihinare, a kua tāwhiti ke tō haerenga mai, kia kore e haere tonu, he nui rawa o mahi, kia kore e mahi tonu. So that's about, we've come too far to not go further. You've done too much to not do more. That wraps up really what we think is happening at Newton Central. To that note, I really want to open it up to the floor. It was going back to what Hannah said at the start, it was a challenge to figure out what we were going to provide in a half an hour lecture on co-governance, acknowledging that it's relatively new too, and we're still defining but this is what partnership looks like to us. So we're open to questions, and I'm excited about that part, I think.
And
Or am I not?
No, just before we start, the photo up here is actually an example of our newly intentionalised relationship with Ngāti Whātua Ōrake. This is up at the nursery at Ngāti Whātua. We have a ngahere, a forest at our school that is in need of love and regeneration. And because of our relationship, Ngāti Whātua has actually offered us access to their nursery and their knowledge and experience in replenishing our ngahere with native plants. Oh yeah, they want that.
Probably sensible, Simon.
So if anyone has any questions, we've got a microphone. So
Please do make sure you use the microphone. Those on Zoom can't hear anything if you don't use the microphone. So anyone would like to offer a question?
Okay.
Kia ora kōrua. Consensus decision-making was something that you talked about. And to me, that means that everyone around that board table has to agree. What if there's one squeaky wheel, just one person, not someone from one of the cohorts or another cohort, just one squeaky wheel? How have you dealt with those scenarios to keep moving forward in the way that you need to at Newton Central?
Yep. We decided, and we were very intentional about this with the co-governance model, with the consensus as well, that we would all follow the idea of if you had a differing view to the majority, that it was your task to bring a solution to the table to be able to discuss it. And everyone that comes into the board comes in with that notion. An example of this, as Hannah said, is the recruitment of our tumuaki last year. What could have been dealt with in probably 20 minutes took 2-3 hour Sundays, about 6 hours and so forth. But I think what we really appreciate is the ability to discuss, hear the other views of the other person, and it forces us to consider their point of views and look at it from all different angles. We continued the discussions and continued to work through them until we came to consensus. Hannah?
And I think part of that as well is really understanding where the concern comes from. So articulating the concern. For example, with the mask mandate, we did have one person who really did not want us to go down this path. When we got deeper down into the discussion, it turned out the thing that they were really concerned about was calling it a mandate. So once you sort of find out where the concern is coming from and why it's there, then you can take steps to address it. I think the other really powerful thing is time. We don't pressure our decisions. So, as Margie said, we could have held a majority vote and had a new a new principal within 20 minutes. But instead, having an initial discussion, getting to a point, stepping back, letting everyone settle, sit on it, think about it, and coming back together at a later point means that you come with a fresh perspective, a more open heart potentially, because you've had some food, you've had some sleep. So it's all about, sometimes it feels like you're making very tiny steps towards progress, but you are making progress. And I don't think we've ever had, well, not since we've been on the board, we've never had a situation where it's been so terrible that we haven't been able to come to a conclusion. Thanks, Richard.
I'm open to hard questions.
We had some prepared. Oh.
Kia ora, my name's Paul. I'm just wondering if you've been able to write this new constitution so it can be implemented everywhere, and how hard would it be to transpose it into other areas of where co-governance would be obviously appropriate everywhere?
I think that's our hope. Oh, whoops, I've just turned off our slides. I think that we like to think that our experience isn't based on, it's a lived experience of Newton Central School, but the principles that we have established our co-governance model around are transposable. You've got to have the willingness. I think that's probably the biggest hurdle to overcome. You can't have someone necessarily impose co-governance on an organisation. It's got to come from within. But I do think that we'd like to think that, particularly within schools, our actual direct model of an alternative constitution is achievable. And we do think it can be extrapolated out when you look at our principles of whanaungatanga, equal partnership, and consensus. Anyway.
I think we only got news that this was formalised
2-3 weeks ago.
2 or 3 weeks ago. And when we got the call or the email from the minister, well, we were excited. I feel like Hannah was more excited than me. But I don't think it's quite sunken for me how big this is, because even Ministry of Education rang me to congratulate us and said that they would have a cake. And in my mind, they've been part of this journey, or this particular team, for 2 months because they were doing the consult. And what she said to me is, this is pivotal for the nation. And I don't quite get that. That's probably what's good about this. There's a naivety in it. And it suggests that it comes from a really innocent place and a natural place from the heart. Truly, truly. One thing that I do think, though, and I give credits to Newton for, is certainly in my experience, co-governance is one thing, but what good is that if it's not operationalised? And Māori have an issue with that. So, yep, we can go up there and we can do this, but if everything is operationalised, swaying one way, it's a waste of time. And it's not meaningful. However, because this school, for the 25 years that it has, or years on, has continued to make those prods over it from one person on there and so forth, and all the experiences, not being allowed to do a pōhiri, the school has probably got a lot of experience in what it looks like operationalising this co-governance. And I think that that makes a massive difference to ensure that co-governance is meaningful and it is fed down through its operations.
I think just one other point to make is we initially went down a path of wanting to be a designated character school, which is along the lines of a Catholic school. And that was based on our tiriti co-governance model. And the Ministry of Education, the first time we talked to them about that, shot it down because they said we're not an exceptional school. We're essentially a model school for what they want every school in New Zealand to eventually be like. I think there's some way to go before they can achieve that. And Margs and I've given them some feedback on that. But there is this desire currently within the ministry that this should be able to be replicated.
Kia ora, Bruce here. I'm actually currently a school commissioner, so I'm listening with interest. And before that, I used to work for the ministry, and you partly answered the question I'm about to put, which was, what's the attitude of the ministry like? Because I know that the ministry, at the end of the day, does what the minister of the day tells them to do. Yeah. And I suspect those instructions might be about to change sometime in the near future. And then perhaps the environment may not be as conducive as it has been. And so my question is, how helpful and what has the response of the ministry been, and the review office? Because this would be something that would be new for them.
Here's a co-governance answer. You go first. I'll come after you.
Short and brief, very helpful. I think we have had a team of up to 8 people meeting with us remotely from the ministry every 2 weeks for probably almost a year on a regular schedule to discuss how we were implementing this. I think they didn't realise how much work it was going to be when they first took us on. Margie and I are very hands-on. So I think the ministry currently, as you say, is very supportive. I think that with the legal hat on, the legislation is nowhere near being able to actually achieve true co-governance within schools. There are some significant changes that would need to be made, and depending on how October goes, whether there'll be any appetite for that remains to be seen as well. but I think, that we had to undergo a community consultation process that was all facilitated by the ministry, and that went beyond our kura. That was all across our collective of learning, community of learning in the inner city Auckland area. Went through all of the kohanga, the preschools and everything in our area as well. So the ministry undertook all of that process. The ministry compiles the report that gets sent to the Minister of Education. They have been an incredible team. We are very, very grateful for them, but there is that step above that would need to be changed for this to be a more easily replicated model.
So it took us 20 years to find out who we needed to be speaking to. As Hannah said, what we thought we were chasing was designated character, which is otherwise known as special character. When we finally got in front of MOE and probably the right people, it was recognised that a co-governance model isn't necessarily curriculum focused, so therefore led us to go down the pathway of alternative constitution. Once we got there though, I must say, you're seeing 2 of the force. Beside us, we're another 8 board members, plus the Te Whao board members, which is another 6, 7. The shared energy, the shared vision, the shared view is, I can liken it to iwi in action or hapu in action. They were lured in by our enthusiasm and our passion. And then Wellington were just throwing themselves at us. They were keen to hear our visioning. And I think it helped that we had already progressed quite a lot. So as Hannah said, they were prepared to throw anything at us to support us through this journey. And when we got to the point of the consultation process, how many were there? There was 28. How many, what was the feedback? 28?
Yeah.
I think we got 28 responses. So it was a hybrid of online and face-to-face consults for 6 weeks. There were around 28 responses and only 2 weren't in favour. And so this went wide to the community across the kahuiako and then across the nation. Those 2, one of them didn't oppose it, but just had questions. So this all went in the report that got sent down to ministers. It was an overwhelming support for what we had designed. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question. I'm a fan of the Wellington crew now. She's on my speed dial, and unfortunately so is he. I've told them we're coming back for designated character soon.
I have a question about, my name is Ruth. I have a question about how this would operate in an area which was Pākehā dominated with a very small Māori population. Would it be possible, or would co-governance have to be something that could not work in the same way?
Yeah, I like this question. Thank you, Ruth. In my view, yes, it can. Thankfully, we've got some fantastic people of the school for the last 3 or 4 years who have been doing a case study and quite a bit of research on our building within, so Te Ako Pūkaya is the name of our building. Upstairs we have our full immersion and downstairs we have our bilingual. Our membership for Te Whao encompasses all of Te Ako Pūkaya. The study looks at 2 different Māori medium pathways in one building and does a case study on all of how it operates. Interestingly enough, from my perspective only, because it hasn't come out yet, but it's looking to be released probably in the next month or so. It took some things like, if I can try and articulate it, they've interviewed students, interviewed teachers, interviewed the governing boards, and interviewed parents. Some of the results that have come back, here's just a couple. So there is a child that talks about how he likes the space because we've got open modulars and then they separate off for different parts, but they all come in the same room. So this child was talking about how he likes that space because he gets to see that his little sibling is okay, etc. That was one point. In our world, that's tuakana teina. and it's very normal. But what it also does for the teachers is it allows co-facilitation with the students, and it allows the students to take on responsibilities. Interestingly enough, we've tested that in the mainstream part, and we've got some open modular spaces there as well. You start to see the intertwining of values that we recognise in Māori worldview, but actually the setting that it provides for the education or mainstream education settings. Another example that I thought was really useful was there was a parent who, the question must have been, why have you chosen this pathway for your child? What you could hear in all of the answers, there was a common theme around trauma. So it's whether they never had the language growing up or all that kind of stuff. But in our Māori, that is normal that the end user wouldn't necessarily be the child, but in fact, the family, because it comes as a family and it operates as a family. And you'll find that when you come into our space, we have whānau hui, we have a lot of hui, and then we have these hui. But what that study really recognises and highlights is how we've accomplished a marae setting in a mainstream education system. Because they've articulated it so well, I can see how that can model and actually make sense to someone who hasn't been raised in that world. And in my humble opinion, as part of our designated character that'll be here in 2 years' time when we're doing a lecture like this. But I think the answer is yes. It's the two worlds, you'll find they're not too different at all, but it's how we articulate it. And I think they've done a fantastic job of doing that. So I hope that answers.
I think we probably should have prefaced the questions and answers session by saying that there'll be one question and there'll be two answers because we will come at it from different angles. So I fully agree with everything Margie is saying. No, actually, I've got, so when I hear your question, Ruth, I look at it from a slightly different angle. So I look at it from the perspective of a common criticism of co-governance is one person, one vote, and we start to look at unequal voting powers. And to my mind, when I look at Aotearoa was 100% Māori. And it's colonisation that has meant that the population has been systematically, decimated almost. If we say that the population of Māori in New Zealand is about 16% today, and so therefore in a Pākehā dominant society, Pākehā should have more of the voice, we're not looking at the reasons why the Māori population was significantly decreased. So, giving an equal voice to Māori in a situation where they may not be, equal in terms of numbers, is giving voice to Te Tiriti and looking at all of the impacts that have happened since the Treaty of Waitangi as to why that is the case. However, there is a nuance to that, and Margie has touched on it, that Māori are 16% of the population, essentially, or roughly. And if we're asking Māori to take a co-governance role, that is putting a lot of governance burden on Māori. So as Margie says, they have te whāo hui, and then they come to the board hui. So our Māori whānau are essentially doing double the work that we're doing to put into the same kaupapa. And that is something that we need to be, on the main board, need to be conscious of, that, we can sign off from a board meeting and go home. Our Māori whānau will have to go and report back to the whānau. It's a different model of how the community works. And so being mindful of that as a Pākehā sitting on a co-governance board is essential to ensuring that we're not placing a huge burden along with this co-governance structure as well. So, it's being aware that we almost need to be led by Māori as to how much, people can actually take on. We've got 8 roles on our board, which means that everybody has to have a role apart from being a board member, but then our te whāo whānau also have roles within their te whāo board as well. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to acknowledge the burden of the labour that's being shared out. If I can give a couple of tangible examples. So last year we appointed for the first time a deputy principal, a second deputy principal in our kura.
of its 99 years. So we have now one deputy principal from the mainstream side and now one from the Māori side. What this does is it strengthens our senior leadership team. And through this relationship, we've actually given up one of our teachers in the Māori unit to come across to the mainstream unit and teach along there. So there's a lot more interaction, meaningful and very intentional interaction happening now. And as I said before, this is still quite early days for us, so I trust that it's going to continue to evolve. We're seeing similarities too, because we have a commitment to our Pacifica part of the school. A lot of their values and how they operate, because we've got a Māori medium pathway that has operated such for a while, they can actually pretty much the same. It's a case of working them together. So in terms of tangible ways in which we operationalize this co-governance, that's one. We did discuss, or there was a thought about having two principals, but we decided that if the board is co-governing, then it'll be for us to determine that the principal would be a singular principal who would ensure that they uphold the co-governance model and aspirations of the kura, and then continue to operationalize it that way. And our tumuaki is here now. He's just come from a holiday in Queenstown, working holiday. And there's some amazing things happening now, having the two leadership teams side by side. We're now reviewing all of our policies and our values and how we bleed that throughout the curriculum and throughout the school. So it's probably happening. And there's room there for it to happen in other ways, other great ways. Yep.
I'm Joe. I'm a retired political scientist, and that's where I come from. I'm Joe, and I'm a political scientist. You've already touched on some of the difficulties of consensus and the time that sometimes takes. The logic of consensus, of course, is that everybody, if you have to make everybody who's against you as well as everyone who's for you agree with one another, it takes a very long time, and sometimes you can't make a decision. I'm just wondering how you deal with a crisis.
COVID was a crisis. Sorry? COVID was a crisis. Yeah, I guess it depends on the crisis. So Margie and I as co-chairs have a very close working relationship. So if it was an urgent crisis requiring, instant reaction, then we have obviously a whole suite of policies and procedures, and most of those talk about the co-chairs making decisions. It's never one chair, it will always be both of us. So it's just making sure that there are open lines of communication between the co-chairs. If we're talking about things such as COVID, which was a crisis, I think that is an example where our consensus model was, I'd like to say tested, but actually it wasn't that bad. Like we did have a number of issues we did have to negotiate, but I think to a certain extent, the demographic of our community does make things a little bit easier. We do sort of come from fairly similar perspectives in a lot of things. We don't have a lot of hugely differing viewpoints. So we are lucky in that respect. What about you?
I honestly think that the trust on our board at the moment is phenomenal. And what we're trying to do is set up policies and everything around it to ensure that it stays that. But I'd actually like to invite a comment from the back room there, because we've got other board members in the room here. I'm going to ask Chris to stand up, and I'd like him to give a viewpoint from, because she's right, the co-chairs do a lot of this and make some decisions where we have to. But I'd like to ask another board member to give some insight from their point of view on the board around how we deal with a crisis. Thank you, Chris. You're welcome. This is the trust, we call it voluntold.
Voluntold. Yes, I've been voluntold before. Apologies, I can't stand up. I've got a sleeping little person on my lap. Sorry. But I think, yes, some important decisions, crisis decisions are important decisions, and other important decisions can take more time. But it's because we have the chance to flesh them out more. We don't go straight to a vote and then move on. And because we take the time to flesh out all of the different viewpoints, I feel like we come to a richer, better informed decision that encompasses other perspectives and other things that we might not have been able to consider if we'd gone straight to a vote. Because we've worked through people's concerns, then it's not just making a decision, but it's also putting in other things that might mitigate those concerns, which are all valid points. So I feel like we come to richer solutions through the consensus model, although it takes more time. And I think for some of our board members that have come on and sort of been taken aback that, no, we don't just vote, we work towards a consensus. Now that they've gone through that and making some big decisions, they can see the value in that and now are accepting of sometimes the extra time it can take to come to those points. Do you have anything to add there, Dina?
Dina can do the karakia.
Kia ora koutou. No, just really, support what Chris and our co-chairs have said about consensus. It can be challenging just having the really honest conversations with each other, but because we break, after 3 hours, and then come back to it, and just like what Margie said, that things have settled. We've had a chance to maybe talk to our whānau a bit more, or just get a better understanding of what's required of us as a board. It's not easy. Won't kid us by saying that it is easy. There are some challenges that we navigate, but we have a high trust model amongst our whānau. So
I think what this demonstrates is exactly what I was trying to demonstrate. Whilst we stand here as the face for our board, if we had all of our board members in the room, you'll hear the same language. It is definitely, there is a high trust model, and there is a commitment there for all of us to be there for the school and to provide the best outcomes for the school. As Chris has said and Dina has said as well, it's about ensuring that we have rich discussions and welcoming that, embracing it till we land the best decision. You'll find that if you asked all of us individually in separate rooms, you'll get the same answer. So I think, it's all these things here. It's not just what we've done here and what we've achieved here. It's all of the work before us and the foundations that have been laid before us that have made it easy for us to achieve what we've achieved. And now we just got to put it in a little potion and then figure out how we lock it in for when Hannah and Margie move away. That's not happening for me for a while. Got a 3-year-old.
No more questions? Thank you very much, Margie, Hannah. Very inspiring and encouraging. It's really positive to hear such a fantastic result, and it's a great way to celebrate a centenary too.
That was our aim.
Yeah.
I was trying to go for the double.
Yeah.
Didn't quite get there.
But it's really positive and so encouraging. So really without further ado, that will wrap up the presentation. I'll hand over to John, and then I'd like you to all please join us for some kai in the hall, and it would be great to see you then.
Thank you. Now I've got a loud voice. No, it's really.
Yeah, I'll hold it for you. Will you come up here?
Kia ora koutou, folks. I've often heard people give thank yous
I thought those were cute.
to wonderful speakers, and thank you takes longer than the actual presentation itself, so I've got no intention of doing that. The one thing I just want to say, Bruce, thank you for your question about the ministry and ministers. I've had my own share of experiences with both. And in my experience, no minister ever in this country has ever been able to stand in the way of a wonderful idea. None of them. Either because they don't have the intellect or they don't have the cojones or whatever it is, they have never been able to do it. And certainly no ministry. And this is just wonderful. And we should be very proud of what you're doing. And we should be very proud of the fact that you've had the courage to do it. And it is indeed the vision for our future. So thank you very much for what you've done. There's a card here for you.
I thought those were your cue cards. That's what I was trying to take the mic.
I get a black bag here. Now what's in there? You can find it out between the two of you as to what you want. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll let you know what we do. Yeah. Okay. I will take out. Thank you, that. Thank them. They've been a really, I know, they've been really nice, eh?